Hi, I'm John. Welcome to The Art of Narrative. Imagine this. You're in the middle of the Caribbean Sea. You're on a yacht. You're on a hunting trip, headed towards South America. You'll be hunting jaguars. And everything's going well, except for today. Today, everyone on the boat seems nervous. The sailors, even the captain, they all seem spooked by something. Superstition. And so you're alone on the deck, and it's nighttime, and it's dark. It's very dark. You think to yourself, I wouldn't even have to close my eyes to fall asleep right now. It's so dark. And it seems peaceful. But out of nowhere, you hear a noise. It's a noise you recognize. It's a gunshot out in the middle of the ocean, which can only mean one thing. There must be land nearby, an island. So you go to the deck, and you go to the railing, and you crawl up over it, and kind of lean off, because you want to hear and get an idea of where it may have come from. You're curious. When suddenly you lose your footing, and you fall over, and the next thing you know, you're splashing into the ocean. And so you come up, you bob your head up for air, and you panic for a little bit, but soon enough, you get control of yourself. You've been in tight situations before, and so you're confident. And you start assessing the situation. And you look, and you see your yacht sailing off into the distance. And you know that you can't swim fast enough to catch it. And even if you screamed, no one would hear you, not over the sound of the water swell and the engine running. So you only have one option. You have to swim towards the gunshots. And you have to hope that wherever they came from, whatever island they came from, that it's not that far away. So you start swimming. And you swim, and you swim, and you swim, almost to the point of exhaustion. And when you feel like you can't make it anymore, that's when you finally hit the jagged rocks of this island. And you look out, and you just see that it's covered in jungle. And there's no sign of civilization. So you lay back, and you try to get a little bit of rest before you figure out what you're going to do. And then you hear another noise. And this time, it's a scream. And it's an animal scream. And it's not an animal that you recognize. But before you can identify it, it's cut short by another gunshot. This time a pistol. You're not alone on this island. Are these people your salvation? Or did you find yourself in the most dangerous game of your life? Today we're talking about direct versus indirect characterization. And to do that, we're going to use the example of the very famous short story that I just described the intro to, The Most Dangerous Game, written by Richard Cannell and published in 1924. Let's get started with the basics, like, what is characterization? Well, it's when an author describes a character. Simple enough, right? Characterization describes things like a character's physical attributes, their personality. It can describe their motivation, or even their behavior and actions. And it comes in two different varieties: indirect characterization and direct characterization. First, we're going to talk about direct characterization. That's when the writer describes a character directly to you, the reader, through narration. Or, to put it another way, when the narrator describes a character in the text. Basically, the author's just straight up telling you what a character is like. I'll give you an example. Fox has green eyes and a surly attitude. Actually, let me give you a better example. And this is from when our protagonist, Rainsford, or the guy that fell off the boat, meets the antagonist of the story, a man named General Zaroff, or Admiral Zaroff. I don't really remember. Let me read from the text directly. Rainsford's first impression was that the man was singularly handsome. His second was that he was an original, almost bizarre quality about the general's face. He was a tall man, past middle age, for his hair was a vivid white. But his thick eyebrows and pointed military mustache were as black as the night from which Rainsford had come. His eyes, too, were black and very bright. He had high cheekbones, a sharp-cut nose, a spare, dark face, the face of a man used to giving orders, the face of an aristocrat. Direct characterization tells the reader very straightforward things about the character. He had a military mustache. His eyes were black. His face was dark. He had a pointed nose. But direct characterization can lead the reader to infer some things about a character. Using words like sharp cut, dark, and high to describe Zaroff leads us to believe that he is both an intelligent man but also a nefarious person, or a bad guy. When using direct characterization in your own writing, you want to be direct with your reader. You want to describe anything that you think is vital for the reader to know about a character. The details that you choose to share about a character should give the reader some insight into the inner workings of your character's mind or the plot of your story. Take the example above. The author uses words like sharp and dark to describe General Zaroff. So, it's no surprise to the reader that General Zaroff turns out to be a bad guy in the story. These words have negative connotation. And this example teaches us that word choice is very important when it comes to characterization. If you're trying to cut a very imposing figure like General Zaroff, you wouldn't want to say that the character had a round face and a bulbous nose. Think about the words that you're going to use to describe a character, and think about the ways in which a reader might interpret those words. You can use direct characterization to give your readers important details about any new character that enters the story arc. Share any personality traits that might impact the story, but don't give away too much. You need to save some details of the character's personality for the reader to discover on their own. But more on that when we talk about indirect characterization. You can also use direct characterization to create a stark contrast between two characters. Say two characters that are foils of one another. Let's take a look at an example of these two characters interacting at the beginning of our story, The Most Dangerous Game. This is a scene on the ship before Rainsford falls into the ocean, and the two characters are discussing jaguar hunting. "It's the best sport in the world," agreed Rainsford. "For the hunter," amended Whitney, "not for the jaguar." "Don't talk rot, Whitney," said Rainsford. "You're a big game hunter, not a philosopher. Who cares about how the jaguar feels?" "Perhaps the jaguar does," observed Whitney. "They have no understanding. Even so, I rather think they understand one thing, fear. The fear of pain and the fear of death." "Nonsense," laughed Rainsford. "This hot weather is making you soft, Whitney. Be a realist. The world is made up of two classes, the hunter and the huntees. Luckily, you and I are the hunters." Now let's use this example to talk a little bit about indirect characterization. Because from this dialogue, we learn a lot about these characters without the author coming out and directly telling us these things. The interaction between Whitney and Rainsford tells us some important information about our protagonist, Rainsford. Unlike Whitney, he has no respect for the jaguars that he hunts. He doesn't pity them, and he doesn't have any empathy for them. He believes the world is made up of hunters and the hunted, and this idea plays heavily into the theme of the story and also the conclusion of the story. So, indirect characterization is when an author shows a character's personality rather than tell the reader about a character through narration. The author can do this in a few different ways, like showing the character's behaviors and actions, or showing dialogue that the character has with another character, like we just saw with Whitney and Rainsford. The reader is expected to make reasonable conclusions about the character through these scenes of dialogue or action. So how would you write indirect characterization? There's two easy ways, and one we've already talked about, and that's with dialogue. So you could have a character talk to another character, and through that dialogue, that conversation, you can have that character share things about their worldview or their opinions about themes or ideas that will come up in your story. Another easy way to show indirect characterization is with characters' behavior and character actions. So if you have a bad character, a bad guy or girl, you might want to show them doing bad things. Say you've got a really terrible antagonist and you want to show the audience how terrible that antagonist is. Well, you might have them do something like kick a puppy or steal candy from a baby, or something that would be more interesting than those two things. When do you want to use indirect characterization? Really, you can use it anytime in a story. Certainly, it would be important to use it after you've introduced a character through some sort of direct characterization. You don't want to continually use direct characterization throughout a narrative. That would be very boring, and that would come off as like an information dump every time you have the character do something. So, once you've introduced a character and you've done a little bit of direct characterization, the best thing to do after that to show more of that character's personality is to use indirect characterization. So rather than always talking about a character's personality, you want to show the character doing things that give the reader ideas about their personality. Also, you could use indirect characterization when introducing a character. There's no rule that says you have to use direct characterization in a story. If you want a character to have a little bit of mystery when they first show up, you might not really describe them at all in the narration, and then later on, through their actions or through their dialogue, a reader might learn more about them that they didn't know already. So this is a way that your reader can feel like they're discovering things about the story rather than just being told details about the story. So with our character Rainsford, we learn a lot of things about him. When he's talking about the jaguar, we know just from what he's telling Whitney that he doesn't have a lot of empathy for prey. And then when he falls off the boat, we learn that he's a problem solver, that he's good under pressure. And all these things play out in the story because once he's on the island, if you haven't read the story already, spoiler alert, General Zaroff starts hunting him like prey. And in the end of the story, Rainsford is left with a pretty important decision, and I won't tell you what that is, but I will say a lot of the characterization feeds into that final conclusion. So that's really all we have to say about direct and indirect characterization for now. I'm sure that's not all there is to be said on the subject, but that's all I have to say about it. But before we go, I want to leave you with one last example, this time from a movie. I'm not saying what movie it is, but you'll know when you see it. In the scene, there are two characters, and there are good examples of both direct and indirect characterization. So, while you're watching, I want you to pay attention to what the characters are wearing, how they're moving, how they talk, and more importantly, what they're saying. See if you can determine what part is indirect characterization and what part is direct characterization. So, here's the clip.
You're really real. I mean, you're like a machine underneath, right? But sort of alive outside?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over a metal endoskeleton.
This is intense. Get a grip, John. Okay. You're not here to kill me. I figured that part out for myself. So what's the deal?
My mission is to protect you.
Yeah? Who sent you?
You did. 35 years from now, you reprogrammed me to be your protector here, in this time.
This is deep.